Thank you for choosing Helicopter Concepts, your source for interactive training products. We have assembled a team of experts, test pilots, and instructors with many years' experience and thousands of hours piloting the Robinson R22. This video attempts to clarify and simplify the auto rotation. This DVD is not a replacement for training, and you should use this material as a complement to CFI instruction. Our goal is to provide an easy and entertaining source of reference for beginning and advanced pilots.
Each year, year in and year out, almost 1/3 of all of our non-fatal accidents are caused by practice autorotations. Practice autorotations, practicing for an event, an engine failure that rarely occurs.
According to the August 2005 National Transportation Safety Board probable cause reports, there was only one engine failure in the Robinson R22 for January 1999 through December 2003. Unfortunately, during that same time period, there were 140 R22 accidents caused by pilot error. Approximately 1/3 of these accidents were practice autorotations. We hope that you benefit from this material. Please fly safely.
Frederick traffic, this is Helicopter Hotel Charlie 001, departing the right side of 23, Frederick.
In normal flight, the engine provides the energy to drive the rotor system. In auto rotation, we use kinetic and potential energy to power the rotor system instead of the engine. Specifically, we trade altitude and airspeed to create a windmill effect that allows the helicopter to fly safely to the ground.
In simple terms, the engine provides the energy to turn the rotor blades in powered flight. The rotor blades produce lift and thrust because air is pulled through the top of the rotor disc by the engine's power. In auto rotation, air flowing up through the rotor disc from below provides the energy to turn the rotor blades instead. In other words, when air comes from underneath the rotor disc, it propels the rotor blades.
When the engine initially fails and you have to enter auto rotation, the proper procedure is down collective right pedal aft cyclic to bring the nose up a little high, because when the engine quits, the nose wants to descend. When you go down collective, the nose wants to drop also. You're not in a state of auto rotation until we get the air coming up to the rotor disc. So we have to reduce airspeed with aft cyclic and get the nose up so we can get kinetic energy to bend the blades. As we bend the blades, we force air through the blades bend up, Coriolis effect comes in, the mass moves in, it winds up our blades. It stops the decay of the RPM coming down. We're going to use our kinetic energy to throw the fuselage out. The centrifugal force is going to try to stop. The blades are going to act like a brake, and they're going to flex back. As they flex back, the Coriolis effect, the mass moves in, winds it up like a speed skater. We're going to use our kinetic energy to throw the fuselage out there. Centrifugal force is going to try to stop. The blades are going to act like a brake, and they're going to flap up. And as they flap up, that's Coriolis effect, as the mass will move in and your RPM is going to go up. The difference is if we push the cyclic forward, the mass will move out, our RPM will tend to come down. So when we're trying to maintain 60 to 70, as we're moving the cyclic forward and back, our RPMs are going to go up and they're going to come down. As we pull the cyclic back, our RPMs are going to come up. As we push it forward, our RPMs are going to come down. So it's kind of critical that you maintain a 65 knot attitude is what the recommended airspeed is as per the Robinson flight manual.
Energy management is very important to maintain rotor RPM and airspeed. As you can see here, both kinetic and potential energy provide the power required to successfully complete the autorotation. Note the correlation between the instruments, the aircraft attitude, and the stored energy in terms of horsepower seconds available.
Alright, we're going to talk about stored energy or energy management in autorotations, which all helicopters have these components, which is kinetic energy and potential energy. And kinetic energy is everything that's already in motion, which is defined as half the mass times velocity squared. And what does that mean? Is that we're talking about everything that's in motion. For kinetic, it would be our RPM and our airspeed. That's already in motion, so that's kinetic energy. Potential energy is weight times height. That's the definition of potential energy, which we're going to talk about altitude. The higher we are, the more potential energy we have. The faster we're going, the more kinetic energy we have. The heavier the rotor blades, the more kinetic energy we have. So there's two types of rotor systems, high inertia rotor systems and low inertia rotor systems. The Robinson R22 is considered a low inertia rotor system. It has less blade mass compared to our high inertia rotor system.
Caution. The R22 has a light, low inertia rotor system. Most of the energy required for an autorotation is stored in the forward momentum of the aircraft, not in the rotor. Therefore, a well-timed cyclic flare is required, and rotor RPM must be kept in the green until just before ground contact.
The difference between high inertia rotor systems and low inertia rotor systems is that in a high inertia rotor system, it's less likely for the RPM to decay, but if the RPM does decay, it's more difficult to recover the RPM in a high inertia rotor system. In a low inertia rotor system, RPM can decay rapidly, but we can also regain the RPM rapidly because of the low inertia rotor system, less weight to bring it back up.
To maintain rotor RPM in autorotation, the Robinson R22 requires approximately 75 horsepower seconds. Most of this kinetic energy is stored in the forward momentum of the aircraft, not in the rotor. For example, if you reduce rotor RPM from 104% to 75%, you will recover approximately 100 horsepower seconds. However, it is hardly practical to give up 29% of your rotor RPM. In contrast, there is much more kinetic energy stored in forward momentum of the aircraft. For example, at 90 knots, you only have to slow the helicopter by 6 knots to recover the same 100 horsepower seconds. Let's compare the amount of kinetic energy stored in forward airspeed. In the example shown here, you can recover 100 horsepower seconds if you reduce your airspeed from 90 to 84 knots. Only a 6-knot difference. In the next example, you can recover 100 horsepower seconds if you reduce your airspeed from 60 to 50 knots. A 10-knot difference. Note that it takes more airspeed to recover 100 horsepower seconds at slower airspeeds. Finally, you can recover 100 horsepower seconds if you reduce your airspeed from 32 to 0 knots, a 32-knot difference. Another method to recover 100 horsepower seconds can be found in our potential energy. For every 46 feet we descend, we gain approximately 100 horsepower seconds. In this example, the helicopter is traveling at 90 knots at 500 feet AGL. In this configuration, the aircraft has approximately 100 horsepower seconds in rotor RPM, 800 horsepower seconds in forward speed, and 1,100 horsepower seconds in altitude AGL, for a total of 2,000 horsepower seconds of stored energy. This gives the pilot approximately 26 seconds of flight time before ground contact. Let's look at this example in real time. Energy management is very important to maintain rotor RPM and airspeed. As you can see here, both kinetic and potential energy provide the power required to successfully complete the autorotation. Note the correlation between the instruments, the aircraft attitude, and the stored energy in terms of horsepower seconds available. In the next example, the helicopter is traveling at 60 knots at 100 feet AGL. In this configuration, the aircraft has approximately 100 horsepower seconds in rotor RPM, 346 horsepower seconds in forward speed, and 220 horsepower seconds in altitude AGL. This gives the pilot approximately 9 seconds of flight time before ground contact. Let's look at this example in real time. Here, you can see the same energy management techniques in action. However, there is less stored energy available in this flight condition than the previous example.
There are two autorotative tasks in the private and the commercial PTS. One is called the simulated engine failure from altitude, which we commonly refer to as a forced landing or a throttle chop. And in this particular maneuver, the purpose is to teach the student how to respond to an engine failure, how to recognize it, how to properly react to it, how to select the landing area, and then begin to maneuver towards it. The second task is what the PTS refers to as a practice autorotation. And in this task, there's no surprise. The student enters the autorotation on his own. And the purpose of this is to teach the student the elements involved in an autorotative descent and landing.
This video will focus on the practice autorotation. There are 4 phases in an autorotation: the entry, the glide, the flare, and the recovery. First, we will discuss the entry phase of the straight-in practice autorotation.
This is a practice autorotation, so we want to make sure that we do a cockpit check before we get to the entry point. And the cockpit check would be make sure your gauges are green, warning lights are out, fuel's good, full carb heat, we're ready to go. We want to make sure also that our target area is clear, that we're lined up into the wind, straight and level flight, between 70-75 knots of airspeed, between 500 feet to 700 feet AGL is a good place to enter the autorotation. The governor should remain on at all times during the entry. Anytime we do the autos, the governor should remain on.
Note: governor is inactive below 80% engine RPM regardless of governor switch position.
A good place to enter the practice autorotation would be when your target area is between the yaw strings and the top of the instrument panel, usually on a steep approach angle. Whatever you taught by your instructor on a steep approach angle, start off right there. And what we want to do is we want to enter the autorotation. Enter the autorotation by down collective all the way down to the stop without rolling the throttle off. Down collective till the stop. Right pedal to keep it in trim. Aft cyclic to keep the nose from dropping. So it's down collective, right pedal, aft cyclic all at the same time.
Down collective, right pedal, aft cyclic. The entry is down collective, right pedal, and aft cyclic, all at the same time.
When we've got our target area in sight, we got our glide slope in sight when we want to enter, we're going to start off with the entry with smoothly but firmly get the collective all the way down to the stop.
Caution. Catastrophic rotor stall could occur if the rotor RPM ever drops below 80%, plus 1% per 1,000 feet of altitude.
So after you enter, entry is down collective, right pedal, aft cyclic without rolling the throttle off, because as soon as you go down collective, full down, the correlator will bring it to idle automatically. That's when you want to roll the throttle off, is when you split the needles. Don't worry about the throttle on the entry. And a lot of guys I see, they go down collective, right pedal, aft cyclic, and then all of a sudden they immediately pull up before the RPMs even come up. But that's a bad habit to get into. I recommend you don't get into that habit. I recommend that you just do your entry with down collective, right pedal, aft cyclic, without rolling the throttle off. Once the collective's full down, we can reduce throttle a little bit. And then if the RPMs start coming up on our glide, which they might be with two people, then we can roll the throttle and then pull up on the collective. What if the RPMs continue to come down? Because if you're solo with low fuel, you might have to hold that collective all the way down. The RPMs might not come up. Enter the auto rotation by down collective all the way down to the stop without rolling the throttle off. Right pedal to keep it in trim. Aft cyclic to keep the nose from dropping. We want to enter with full down collective, right pedal, aft cyclic, all at the same time. Because as soon as we go down collective without the right pedal, we're going to take the torque off the fuselage. It's going to want to go to the left. It's going to want to follow the rotor blades that turn counterclockwise. So we want to, if you don't do that, it's going to yaw to the left. So we want to smoothly, we're practicing auto rotations. This is practice auto rotation. So we want to make sure that you down collective, all the way, full down, all the way to the stop, right pedal, aft cyclic, all at the same time. But what happens if you go down collective without pulling back on the cyclic a little bit? What happens when you take power away? You push down collective or you reduce power, the nose wants to dip. So we don't want that to happen. So we want to go down collective, right pedal to correct for the yaw, aft cyclic to keep the nose from dipping down or falling below the horizon. As soon as you go down collective, the correlator will kick it to idle. The needle should split. Then you want to roll the throttle off at that time. Once you got that, that would be your entry. Now you're in auto rotation. The helicopter's coming down. And we're on the glide configuration now. We're talking about number 2 is the glide. After we're in auto rotation and we have the descent established, then we're going to work on the glide. On the glide, we want to make sure that our RPMs are in the green between 97 and 104. We want to maintain our airspeed between 60 and 70 knots in trim. And we're just going to pretty much hold that on the way down. RPM, if the RPM starts coming up, we're going to pull a little collective, and if it starts rejoining the needles, we're going to give it a roll on the throttle into the idle to keep the needle split. And if the RPM gets too low, we're going to reduce the collective down to keep the RPM in the green, to maintain RPM in the green. And on the glide, we're just going to hold our 60 to 70 knot attitude and in trim. When we descend below 100 feet AGL, we want to maintain aircraft alignment with a slip. A slip is if we have a slight crosswind and we have it in trim, we want to take it out of the trim and line it up with our direction of travel. And then we're going to slip it so we're straight. If the skids hit the ground, we're going to make sure that we're going to hit straight. When we start descending below 100 feet AGL, we want to maintain our ground track. So if you have 65 knots, if we're at 65 knots and the RPM is going up, we pull up on the collective. If your RPM is decaying, coming down, you go down on the collective slightly. We don't want to make heavy collective movements, so just slightly down collective, slightly up collective, as needed to maintain the RPM in the green so we can get ready for our flare. As we move the cyclic, if we try to gain our airspeed or reduce our airspeed, we are going to, our RPMs are going to go up or go down. As we pull back, our RPMs are going to go up, which is going to cause the blades, we're going to force more air through the blades, which is going to cause the blades to cone up, which is going to, of course, affect the mass will move in and wind them up. And same thing as when we get too slow on our airspeed, we want to push the cyclic forward, we're going to drop the nose of the helicopter. As we drop the nose of the helicopter, we're going to take the corrosive effect out of it, and the mass is going to move out, and our RPM is going to come down. And the way to control that is that we've got to maintain 65 knots. Try to maintain our attitude with a 65 knot attitude. So try to limit your cyclic control as much as you can. The more forward and aft you play with that cyclic, the more your RPMs are going to go up and down. Same thing with the collective. Your RPMs, if you got 65, you got a 65 knot attitude, and your RPMs are coming down, then what we want to do is we want to lower the collective to maintain RPM in the green. And if the RPMs are coming up, we're going to go up collective slightly. We don't want to chase it. We don't want to pull too much collective and have the RPM droop and then jam it down and have it come back up and start chasing it all down. Because as you move the collective up and down, your nose is going to drop up and down too. Because we're decreasing pitch. As we decrease pitch, the nose will drop a little bit. As we add pitch, it's going to come up a little bit. And so that's going to mess up your RPM. So the best thing is to find your nice glide, 60 to 70 knots of airspeed, RPM 97 to 104. In the glide, on the way down, your instructor should be calling out any deviations in airspeed, RPM. If your RPM gets too high, he should call it out. RPM, watch RPM, it's climbing. Our airspeed's too low, watch your airspeed. Get your attitudes out of trim. So your instructor should be doing that. When we get near 100 feet, or we start passing 100 feet, we have to make a go, no-go decision if we're going to continue with the auto rotation, the practice auto rotation, or are we going to abort the auto rotation. At that point, if your RPMs aren't in the green, your airspeed's not between 60 and 70, your rate of sink is greater than 1,500 feet a minute, your instructor should abort, and you should abort the auto and initiate a go-around.
Safety Notice number 38, which is found in your pilot operating handbook, provides an excellent technique to safely practice the auto rotation. First, let's take straight-in auto rotations, and then we'll discuss 180-degree auto rotations. This technique is not to allow the aircraft to descend below 100 feet unless three very important parameters are met. If these parameters are not met, the instructor should take the controls and make an immediate power recovery. These parameters are airspeed, stabilized between 60 and 70 knots. I mean stabilized, not 62 knots on its way to 58 knots, but stabilized somewhere between 60 and 70 knots. Rotor RPM, stabilized between 97% and 104%. In all our 22 models, the power off rotor limits are 90 to 110%. So for this check, we want the RPM stabilized between 97 and 104%, which is the green range for an alpha and beta, and just below the green to the top of the green for a beta 2. And a normal rate of descent, usually less than 1,500 foot per minute. Since we're not going to allow the aircraft to descend below 100 feet unless these three parameters are met, we have to begin to check these three parameters somewhere above 100 feet. I recommend instructors make this check verbally, either by calling out 100-foot check okay, or actually looking at the instruments and RPM is good, airspeed is good, descent rate is good. Or if you like, you could even call out the numbers. RPM mid-green, airspeed 65 knots, 1,300 foot per minute, ready to descend. Whatever the pilot or instructor is comfortable with, but I think it's important to verbalize the check. That way the instructor and the pilot know that the check is being made and the aircraft is then cleared below 100 feet. If the auto rotation is being practiced above 4,000 feet density altitude, then the aircraft should not be allowed to descend below 200 feet, and the check should be made somewhere above 200 feet to ensure that there's enough altitude to make the power recovery should it be necessary.
All right, we're in the glide. We got our RPM to green. Airspeed between 60 and 70. Rate of sink less than 1,500 feet. At approximately 40 feet, we're going to start our flare. All right, we're in the glide. We got our RPM to green. Airspeed between 60 and 70. Rate of sink less than 1,500 feet. At approximately 40 feet, we're going to start our flare. Now, we're not going to abort. We're going to continue with the practice auto rotation. We're going to bring it to the next step. We're going to do the flare. Once the cross checks are okay, approximately 40 feet, we want to initiate a flare with some aft cyclic. Just enough cyclic to stop our rate of descent and reduce some forward airspeed. I like to see as we initiate the flare, so we don't balloon up and we don't hit the ground, is a nice gentle flare while continuing to flare until we're ready for the power recovery. I tell my student, look outside, don't worry about the gauges now, because a cross check was okay. Approximately 40 feet, gently start to flare with some aft cyclic, and that's going to reduce our forward airspeed and decrease our rate of descent. When we flare, I like to see the RPM in the yellow when we flare. And that's what I like to see. I like to see the gentle aft cyclic when we flare. Not too much to balloon up and not too little so we continue to hit the ground. I like to see a gentle flare, and as we flare, I want it up to about 106%, 107%. Because I don't want the flare and then the RPMs just to sit there. Because as soon as we stop flaring, you're not G-loading the blades, you're not coning the blades, and your RPM is going to start coming down. And then all of a sudden, that's not going to set us up for the power recovery. I like to see the gentle aft cyclic when we flare. Not too much to balloon up and not too little so we continue to hit the ground. If our rate of descent is really fast, we're going to pull more. If our rate of descent is not enough, we're gonna back off a little bit on the flare. And so that's kind of what we're looking at when we flare. Once we initiate the flare, all your RPM controls with your cyclic. If the RPMs are going too high, the only way to stop the RPM is with some gentle forward cyclic. The RPMs will immediately stop, and as soon as they stop, you can continue flaring again. But do not add collective in the flare to control your RPM, because by the time the RPMs are coming up fast, and you add collective, you're going to overspeed it, and then they're going to come down rapidly, and you're going to have a quick descent. So we don't want to do that. The only time you use your collective is in the glide to control your RPM. Approximately 40 feet. We want to initiate a flare with some aft cyclic. Just enough cyclic to stop our rate of descent and reduce some forward airspeed. Some of the things that affect the flare are going to be your entry airspeed, your gross weight, the temperature outside, the wind. All that stuff's going to take effect. Every auto rotation is different. I tell you, like every snowflake is different. There's not two alike. Every auto rotation is different because you come down different airspeeds. You got your RPM different, so it's going to require a different kind of flare on each one, and you just kind of feel it.
The recovery is where you exit the auto rotation. It is a nearly opposite maneuver from entering the auto rotation. Whereas the entry was down collective, right pedal, and aft cyclic, the recovery is forward cyclic, up collective, and left pedal. The recovery is forward cyclic, up collective, and left pedal.
Approximately 8 to 10 feet skid height, level the helicopter with some forward cyclic, and while we're pushing forward, then that's when you start bringing the collective in, start joining the needles, add throttle if necessary, and left pedal to maintain heading, and then terminate at no lower than a 5-foot hover. We're about 8 to 10 feet, and the tail's real close to the ground. We have to level the helicopter now. At the end of the flare, we have to level the helicopter with forward cyclic, and as we push forward, we're going to bring some collective in. And as your RPMs are floating down, you got a lot of energy, so simultaneously up collective, forward cyclic, and then terminate at no lower than a 5-foot hover. What I see is a lot of guys flare, and then all of a sudden they stop the flare, and then they jam the cyclic forward, and then they pull collective while the nose is down, and then they do like a massive run-on. While the nose is still high, add the collective. Since we start leveling the helicopter, adding collective, maintaining our heading with the left pedal, we're going to need a little bit of left pedal. We want to terminate to a 5-foot hover, no lower than a 5-foot hover. If needed, we're going to bring it all the way down to the ground if the engine doesn't come on. Be prepared to touch ground straight and level. Approximately 8 to 10 feet skid height above the ground. We're going to start pushing the cyclic forward to level the helicopter. Just prior to the nose becoming level, we want to start adding the collective at this point. And if needed, we'll roll on some throttle to maintain RPM. We'll add the collective, simultaneously leveling the helicopter, left pedal, because we're adding collective. We don't want any yaw because it's going to yaw to the right. So we want to make sure that we add the pedal, keep it straight. We want to terminate this at approximately no lower than 5 feet. And we want to be prepared in a practice auto rotation if the engine doesn't come on. So be prepared to set it down. All practice auto rotations should be prepared to bring them down to the ground.
A high percentage of training accidents occur after many consecutive auto rotations. So to maintain instructor focus and limit student fatigue, I recommend only 3 to 4 consecutive auto rotations. Then go off and do another maneuver, do a running landing, or do a normal approach, and then come back and do 3 or 4 practice auto rotations. The 180-degree practice auto rotation causes most of our practice auto rotation R22 accidents.
We want to make sure, we want to be at 700 feet AGL, 75 knots on the downwind for the entry. We want that extra 200 feet because on the straight end we could do it at 500 to 700 feet on this one. But this one, you should be at 700 feet because when we make the turn, you're going to lose a lot of altitude quick. So we start them up a couple hundred feet higher for the 180 auto. So on the entry, compared to the straight end, definitely be at 700 feet, 75 knots on the downwind. We want to do our cockpit check, gauges green, warning lights out, fuel, carb heat on, 75 knots, 700 feet AGL. When we are beamer target area on the downwind, 75 knots, 700 feet AGL, that's when we want to enter the auto rotation. And we want to do everything the same as before. It's down collective, right pedal, aft cyclic. And don't start your turn till the RPMs start coming up. If the RPM's coming up, control your RPM, then immediately start the turn. So on the entry, compared to the straight in, definitely be at 700 feet, 75 knots on the downwind. And don't start your turn till the RPM start coming up. If the RPM's coming up, control your RPM, then immediately start your turn. You start your turn, gentle turn. Don't want to do too steep of a turn. Too steep of a turn, you start losing a lot of lift and start falling rapidly. That's a common error. Once the glide is established, we start our turn. As we're in the turn, you're going to put some G loading on the blades. You're going to cone the blades. Coriolis effect is going to happen. Your RPM is going to wind up in the turn. So we need to control that with some up collective. And as we make the turn, prior to 100 feet AGL, we should be level flight and lined with our touchdown zone. But then as all that collective that you had in the turn as soon as you level off, there's no more G forces, G loading on the turn, so the blades are going to come out. Your Coriolis effect is going to be opposite. Your mass is going to move out. Your RPMs are going to come down. So as we roll out of that turn, we have to remember to reduce the collective to maintain the RPM in the green.
The 180-degree practice autorotation causes most of the practice autorotation R22 accidents. Therefore, it's especially important to check the same parameters we check on the straight-in autorotation prior to the helicopter descending below 100 feet AGL, plus one more, and that's the turn must be completed prior to 100 feet AGL. So the four parameters we'll check on the 180-degree auto are airspeed, stabilized between 60 and 70 knots, rotor RPM stabilized between 97 and 104%, a normal rate of descent, usually less than 1,500 foot per minute, and the turn should be completed prior to 100 feet AGL. Of these four parameters, I feel rate of descent is perhaps the most important. There are four factors or common pilot errors that cause high descent rates in the 180-degree turn. High bank angles, high airspeed, high rotor RPM, and an out of trim condition. Let me begin with bank angle. If a pilot begins the 180 with a shallow bank angle, recognizes the need to increase the bank angle, an excessive bank angle will cause a high sink rate. Quite commonly, if the pilot allows the nose to drop in a turn, this will cause an increase in airspeed, which will also cause an increase in descent rate. High RPM can also cause a high descent rate. When the pilot rolls into the turn, a high RPM, 108 and 109%, will cause a high sink rate. An out of trim condition also causes the high descent rate. It's quite common for pilots to help the turn with excessive pedal in the direction of turn. Too much left pedal in a left turn, too much right pedal in a right turn. Any one or combination of these four factors can cause higher descent rates, which must be arrested prior to the helicopter descending below 100 feet. As in the straight-in autorotation, I feel it's important for the instructor to verbalize the check of these parameters prior to the aircraft passing through 100 feet. So the four parameters we'll check on the 180-degree auto are airspeed, stabilized between 60 and 70 knots, rotor RPM stabilized between 97 and 104%, a normal rate of descent, usually less than 1,500 foot per minute, and the turn should be completed prior to 100 feet AGL. If these parameters are not met, the instructor should terminate the autorotation and initiate an immediate power recovery. Since the idea is not to let the helicopter go below 100 feet unless these parameters are met, the check of these parameters has to be done above 100 feet. I recommend instructors make this check verbally, either by calling out 100-foot check okay, or actually looking at the instruments and RPM is good, airspeed is good, descent rate, normal, usually less than 1,500 foot per minute, and the turn is completed. If these four parameters are met, we can continue past 100 feet. If the autorotation is being practiced above 4,000 feet density altitude, then the aircraft should not be allowed to descend below 200 feet, and the check should be made somewhere above 200 feet to ensure that there's enough altitude to make the power recovery should it be necessary.
In preparation for the flare, the helicopter should not descend below 100 feet AGL unless the following conditions have been met: airspeed between 60 and 70 knots, rotor RPM in the green, rate of descent less than 1,500 feet per minute, and the turn should be complete. If these parameters have been met, the flare is executed exactly the same as the straight-in auto rotation. Here is some additional review material.
Approximately 40 feet, we want to initiate a flare with some aft cyclic. Just enough cyclic to stop our rate of descent and reduce some forward airspeed.
As you can see, the 180 recovery is performed exactly the same as the straight-in recovery. Here is some additional review.
Approximately 8 to 10 feet skid height. Level the helicopter with some forward cyclic, and while we're pushing forward, then that's when you start bringing the collective in. Start joining the needle, add throttle if necessary, and left pedal to maintain heading. If you're 100 feet and your airspeed's not between 60 and 70 and your RPM's not between 97 and 104 and your rate of sink is greater than 1,500 feet, we're going to initiate a go-around. Initiate a go-around is by adding up collective as the needles are joined. We're going to add throttle as needed with the governor should be on at this point, and the correlator will help bring the power in. When we want to, once we initiate a power recovery, then we want to go around.
Safety Notice number 38, which is found in your pilot operating handbook, provides an excellent technique to safely practice the autorotation. First, let's take straight-in autorotations, and then we'll discuss 180-degree autorotations. This technique is not to allow the aircraft to descend below 100 feet unless three very important parameters are met. If these parameters are not met, the instructor should take the controls and make an immediate power recovery. The three parameters are airspeed, stabilized between 60 and 70%, rotor RPM, stabilized in the green, and a normal rate of descent, usually less than 1,500 foot per minute. Now for the 180-degree autorotation, we're going to add one additional parameter, and that is that the turn must be completed prior to 100 feet. So in the 180-degree autorotation, we'll check four things: RPM in the green, airspeed between 60 and 70, descent rate, normal, usually less than 1,500 foot per minute, and the turn is completed. If these four parameters are met, we can continue past 100 feet. Now the thinking of this 100-foot check is if the student arrives at 100 feet and either the RPM, the airspeed, or the descent rate is not right, the mistake was made at higher altitudes. Too many of these accidents are caused by the instructor jumping on the controls below 100 feet and trying to salvage this already deteriorating situation, and never quite catches up to the helicopter. This might show the student what a good pilot you are, but it doesn't really teach the student anything. The student's mistake was made up at altitude by allowing either the descent rate or RPM or airspeed to go outside of the parameters. That's where the instructor must go to fix the problem. So the discipline that we'd like to instill into the flight instructors is that if these parameters are not met by 100 feet, the flight instructor takes the controls, not continues the autorotation or not tries to fix the autorotation, but takes the controls and immediately comes in with power and terminates the maneuver completely.
To abort the autorotation, to initiate a power recovery, we're going to raise the collective to join the needles. If needed, add throttle to assist the governor.
Remember, whenever you're on downwind, about to do a practice autorotation, you're going to conduct a maneuver that causes most of the non-fatal accidents in the R-22.